with a subject that really could either be discussed in 2 minutes or 2 weeks. It's obviously a very complex, but at the same time very simple, clear-cut subject, topic, whatever you want to call it. So Erev Tov, good evening. Good evening, everyone. I'm glad that you guys are here and not watching the football. I don't know what's on tonight. Something is on. Or the other stuff that's on, but you're here. You're here. You want to discuss a little bit about, or a lot of bit about the issues that are important to Judaism. Actually, I don't know who chose this topic, but this topic is something that happens to be discussed in the Torah portion today. So I always like to open the Chumash whenever we talk about contemporary issues. I open the Chumash, the good old Chumash that we read in Shul, that's been around for so many years, without any additions or changes, thank God, so far. Never will be. But it is what it is, and the lessons are so timely all the time, a lot more than Wall Street Journal, lahavdil. So, what can you think of? I see Shari there. She probably can tell you the first story dealing with anti-Semitism in the Torah. Anyone else want to jump in? You know, my Zelig once asked so innocently, he said, why did Cain kill his brother? So he said, because he was able.
So Amalek isn't the first one.
Amalek, okay. Amalek is actually a good story, but before that, the Torah portion that we're reading now in Book of Shemos, we learn about Moshe. Moses, our great teacher, right? So Moses, you think about Moses is intellectual, Moses is spiritual, Moses is a holy man, and yet the first story that we read about in the portion in the Book of Shemos, which was just begun to be read, in the Book of Shemos, the first thing we read is about how Moshe kills somebody. Imagine, is that a Jewish thing? Moshe sees that this Egyptian is beating his brother, and he turns to the right, turns to the left. There are actually those midrashic explanations that say that he looked into his future, see whether there was anything positive going to be coming out of him. And one thing actually I didn't see, but I sort of have the feeling that when he was looking to the right, to the left, is when we learn today and we hear about the collateral or friendly fire that we have often. So you always have to look to the right and to the left before you shoot, before you do something, because there might be some collateral damage. Anyway, but that aside, Moshe, we're told, goes ahead and he kills somebody. Now, when we greet each other, when we come together, what's the opening greeting traditionally said between two Jews? See, with your mute on, I can't hear.
Shalom Aleichem.
Oh, I knew somebody would come up with that. Shalom Aleichem. And what's the immediate response to that one?
Alechem Shalom.
Alechem Shalom. Why don't you just say Shalom Aleichem the way I said it? Or the way you initially, right? But it's interesting, the Rabbi actually pointed it out once. You know, that's the tradition, right? The tradition is, and it's been so for many years, one Jew says, Shalom Aleichem, peace unto you, and the response is, Aleichem Shalom, unto you, peace. Good morning, morning good. Why do we do that? Shalom is peace. Aleichem Shalom. So if you go into the mystical aspects of it, it becomes a little bit more complicated because Shalom is obviously the wish. Aleichem is you, meaning putting yourself into the story. So depending on which comes first, so sort of like you're being empowered by the other person. But without going into too mystical, in a very simple sense, It's basically setting the grounds for a reasonable Jewish conversation, which is to argue. You say Shalom Aleichem, I say Aleichem Shalom. So now we have that understanding between us that we have different opinions. And that's fine. That's what it's about. We're not here just to be nice to one another. We're not going to accomplish anything. When we get together, when two people get together, we want to change the world. We want to take on a project. We want to influence, we want to do something. And that's not going to be through, just patting each other on the back. So we make it clear from the onset that we have opposite opinions, but yet let's work it out. Let's work it out. Let's have a l'chaim, and let's toast, and let's discuss our differences. So the differences is really the basis of what it's about. And that's why this very first story where Moshe Rabbeinu gets really tough, in a way that it wasn't his personality, because we know the rest of Moshe Rabbeinu's history, he wasn't carrying around the gun. He wasn't interested in that. He was more into the spiritual, into the intellectual, but that's where he was. So what's interesting is that one of the midrashic disputes about what exactly happened, how did Moshe kill him? Medrash discusses, how did Moshe kill him? Like, what difference did it really make? Thank God that he was a threat. He eliminated him. That's it. You think that that's the only part that's necessary for the history, because that's the only thing that the Torah tells us about it. Yet the Medrash digs into it further and argues. So do you think there are two opinions? No, there are three opinions actually. The first one says be'egrov, with a fist. The second opinion says with a shovel. The third opinion, which is actually brought on by Rashi says b'shem hamaforish, with the secret name of Hashem. The name that we don't know. There's a hidden name of Hashem that has incredible powers. And with that incredible power, he was able to suck out the life of this evil person. And that was it. So it was a miraculous type of death. So it's interesting that Rashi chooses the last one, which seems least natural. And that is because later when Dathan turns to Moshe and he says to him, are you going to kill me the way you said to the Egyptian? So because the Torah uses the term hala hargeni ata omer, in other words, you're going to say, that sort of tells us later that he was referring to the way he killed the Misri, the way he killed the Egyptian, which was through speech. And obviously he didn't just call him Shegitz and he died. So there has to be some other speech, there has to be some other utterance that he said that caused this to happen. Be it as it may, we find these three opinions, but what's interesting is that all these have very practical applications to us as we go through life, as we deal with this historical phenomenon, which is not just a phenomenon, because we know that we didn't just defeat Haman, we didn't just defend ourselves from Amalek, we didn't just fight, all the different tyrants throughout history, but we actually, from each and every experience, as somebody, I forgot who it was, but somebody once put it, that we didn't just defeat them, we determined to eat them. So out of Haman we made a hamantash, out of Antiochus we made latkes, and everything turned into a meal, and Paro was turned into matzahs, and we're eating. We're constantly eating. But what's this eating? The eating is part of the defeating. It's defeating the enemy and the threat, because as much as there's a threat and as much as there has been prognosis looking at the Jewish community and thinking, we're reaching the end, that is true, when we talk about the Babylonians and the Greeks and all those great empires, it's not true about the Jew. On the contrary, we're here. We're the only ones that are still here intact the way we were. So what's really this mystery, I think, to just to step back for a moment, why is it that while we're, merely 1% of the population, of the world population, or 2% perhaps at most, this becomes the phenomenon, this becomes the obsession of everybody, including the United Nations and all the forces that represent unity and equality and human rights and all those things. Unfortunately, the only thing that they're united in with is their condemnation of the Jewish people. And when some of us try to just brush it away, it's about Israel, it's about politics. It's not about politics, it's about the Jew. Israel is Jewish and Jewish is Israel, and you can't separate it. So the fact that we find that there's such obsession and there's such hatred turned into hatred, and at the same time, actually, I don't know, Rabbi Yoni's not here yet, but earlier today, I met him. You are here, good, thanks, shalom.
They're here.
Oh, I see the whole Weizmann room, shalom. So we were talking earlier, what were you going to talk about anti-Semitism? I said, as far as I'm concerned, there is no anti-Semitism. And in reality, when I was growing up in Brooklyn, in a community that was mainly consisted of Holocaust survivors, my parents both made it on the skin of their teeth out of Russia right after the war. But we're in the Golden Medina, we're in America, everybody loves us, everybody admires us. And the truth is they do admire us. Most of the people in the world admire us at some level, especially when we live, I believe, when we live the way we should, when we're the true Jew, then they admire us. But then there's also that hatred. Why is that there hatred? Because there's a mission that we have to become the chosen people. The chosen people are those that are expected to live up to a higher standard and to bring the world, which otherwise seems disconnected from God, to bring the world to a state where they recognize God. Now, that doesn't mean that they have to become Jewish. On the contrary, the 613 mitzvahs are for the Jewish people only, because we are, we're so to speak, wearing the uniform. But the 7 Noahide laws, which are laws that are connected to civilization, to civilized world, that's something that's incumbent upon all people, and it's incumbent upon the Jewish people to teach them and inspire and enlighten the world. So, and some of that could be a little bit uncomfortable. So just like, most of us are, depending on our age, if we're a little younger, we hate the police because, they might stop us if we're speeding. And when we get a little older, we begin to appreciate what they're doing. And I think that that's really what it is. It's about the maturity, and it's about our responsibility to teach the world what we're really are all about. And I think if we do a better job of teaching and living by example, and living the way we should, living the way they know, according to their reading of the Bible, the way we should behave, the more we adhere to that, the more we'll be able to overcome. But to think that we're completely going to eradicate it, that's a little bit of a dream. So I just wanted to close by, again, coming back to this concept of Moshe. How exactly did he kill the Egyptian? Why? What difference does it really make? So one of the ways that we can explain it is by understanding the fist is the power. The fist represents the position. In the olden days, we used to have the JDL. It was a big movement. Some of you might remember. They would go out around protesting and claiming every Jew at 22. Now, we didn't necessarily believe in that. It's not something that, it's more the ammunition of Esau, we're more peaceful and so on and so forth. But actually, it wasn't until recently that it was discovered that the Lubavitcher Rabbi Schneerson, back in Russia, in Ukraine, was actually carrying a gun, and he had trained many young people to carry guns because of the pogroms that went on. Now, for most of his life, and at least all the time that I've known the Rebbe, there was never a mention of a gun. There was never even conversation about that type of behavior, because thank God it wasn't necessary. That's what I believe. But sometimes when it's necessary, you just have to do it. But overall, there definitely are those people that are inclined towards the understanding that a Jew has to have a fist, a Jew has to be trained in Krav Maga, a Jew has to be a little more forceful and not come to the aggressor and say to him, you know what, I'll offer you some anger management therapy. When they get a little out of hand, you have to have a fist. And I think in today's day and age is definitely more on the practical side is the security. The fact that if we're not carrying a gun, we have to be careful, and we have to hire security, and we have to lock our doors, and we have to do things that are going to protect ourselves. And we can't just rely that everybody loves us and everybody's going to be nice to us if we're nice to them. So that's the first thing. And also this apologetics is also inappropriate according all to the first opinion. The second opinion says, forget the fist, let's take out the shovel. The shovel represents, obviously back then it was the shovel that happened to be the part of the slaves' tools. So he took the very same tools that was given to the slave to do what he didn't want to do and protect him. What does it represent? I think in our world, it represents, the ADL, the Apex, the organizations that believe that you have to take the shovel and you have to start building. That's how you're going to deal with anti-Semitism. You're going to build, and through strength, you'll have influence. And eventually and ultimately, you're going to be able to influence the environments around you and hopefully stop the hate or other slogans that are spewed and very well represented by that type of the second class of Jews who feel that you have to build political strength, you have to build financial strength, you have to build a position, and from a position of strength, you'll be influential and be able to change the story of anti-Semitism. And then finally, there's a third opinion that says, you have to use the name of God, which obviously is Torah. Torah, meaning that you have to pray and you have to beseech and get God involved and hope that will influence the people from becoming those haters, hate mongers, to becoming more civilized. Which is, in my opinion, the position that the Lubavitcher Rebbe of blessed memory has taken and taught us how to really not just see the three as individuals, but fuse them all together. Understand that really the true problem of anti-Semitism, I believe, is more within our community. I think if we can eradicate the discomfort that we have for one another, and sometimes even as far as lack of tolerance for one another, and even crossing a little bit of hatred, I think that's really the core of what trickles and eventually turns into a global anti-Semitism. So that's why I think the Rebbe's approach, that where we take all three opinions. There was actually one of the great leaders in ultra-Orthodox leaders in Jerusalem came to the Rebbe and he was complaining how, he's leading all these great protests against the Shabbos, people who desecrate Shabbos and all the other major issues in Israel. And his people, he can never get them to participate. He can't get the Chabadniks to participate in these protests. And so the Rebbe said, you know what, let's think about it for a moment. From all the protests you've seen, from all the people from all the Baalei Tshuva, we know that there are a lot of Baalei Tshuva, a lot of people who return to Torah, even though they didn't grow up with it. It's called the Baal Tshuva. So it says, from all the Baal Tshuva out there that are keeping Shabbos, how many of them started keeping Shabbos because of a broken windshield? Because of a stone that was thrown on their car when they were driving on Shabbos? Chances are none. So you want to be effective, so invite them into a Shabbos meal. Don't throw stones at them. And the Rebbe was very much against, in general, any throwing stones, whether it's from the left to the right or right to the left. Don't throw stones, don't argue, don't fight, don't kill each other. Let's learn how to live together and appreciate one another and realize that we are united against our enemy. And when we're truly united against the enemy, against the attackers, God willing, we'll never repeat the troubles that we've had and the stuff that we're fearful of right now. Anyway, I think I'm a little bit over my time. Rabbi Yoni, jump in, and then we'll be open for questions.
Shkoyach. I think Rabbi Katzman said it all. And I do agree with whatever Rabbi Katzman said. I would like maybe to reach out with a question. First of all, good evening, everyone. I'd like to ask a question. Mark, can you I'll see everyone? Yeah. Who had experience, maybe I'll call it that way, with anti-Semitism? If you could please raise your hand, or see only 2, 3, 4. Okay, 4 people, the rest are either didn't or with cameras that are not on. So I'll try to take it a little bit back to the history. And when actually the concept of anti-Semitism maybe started, and I don't know if it will surprise you or not, but let's say 200 years ago, they didn't call it anti-Semitism. They called it hate of Jews. Okay, that means that 200 years ago, if each one of us felt hated because he was Jewish, he had the option. Oh, can I remove the mask? Thank you. Each one of us had maybe the option to go and become Christian or Muslim or whatever, and then maybe the other people around him didn't hate him. I think from the Holocaust, maybe a little bit before that, started a new concept of doesn't matter your religion, matters where you came from, what's your nation. And in the Holocaust, no one cared if you converted into a different religion or you stayed Jewish or not. They hated us because we were Jews. And from around that area at that time, we don't remember exactly what time the history tells us it started, but since then we call it anti-Semitism. Okay, Semitism, of course, is antisemut, the family of Shem. We all know that Noach had 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Yefet. And today we call it anti-Semitism. So basically, every time that we hear about hate against Arabs, they also came from the nation of the Semites, the Shem. So also against them, it's anti-Semitism. So earlier when I met Rabbi Katzman during Mincha, he said that for him, there's no anti-Semitism. And I totally agreed, because I really believe that it's not, maybe today it's a combination between anti-Semitism and anti-Judaism. Okay, because, and we mentioned that I think last time that Rabbi Katzman and I were here, the nations hate us because who we are and the nation that we came from. They don't care what we will do, or don't care if we will convert, or don't care if we grew up in the United States or in Israel. And we can't really point out a specific reason why the other nations hate us. They hate us because we Jews, and because we Jews, we believe that we believe in certain things, and it happened to be that we also pretty successful, like we mentioned also in the past, that the really high percent of the people that got the Nobel Prize happened to be that they're Jewish. Even though, like Rabbi Katzman mentioned earlier, we're only 1 or 2% out of the population. And so I don't know if we can say that that's the reason that people hate Jews, but all across the history, since the stories in the Torah, since the Yetziat Mitzrayim, Pharaoh, and I'll go back to what Rabbi Katzman said, Pharaoh recognized something fascinating. He was the first person in the history to recognize that the family of Yaakov, the family of Israel that went down to Egypt, turned to be a nation. He was the first person in the history that called the Jewish people a Jewish nation. The verse says, "Hine am bnei Israel rav ve'atzum mimenu." There's this nation that lives with us, and he hated us because we're a nation. And if we look in the verse and try to understand, find the reason why Pharaoh hated us, why Pharaoh put us to be slaves, we'll see a fascinating idea. We'll see that Pharaoh says, "V'nilcham banu ve'ala min haaretz." Pharaoh recognized the first mission of the Jewish people that he tried to stop. The word aliyah, we're all familiar with. Pharaoh was extremely scared, extremely afraid that the Jewish people will leave Egypt. The Jewish people were so successful that then back in Egypt, they were the head of the banks, they were the lawyers, they were the businessmen, they run the banks. They were so successful that Pharaoh was so afraid that they will leave and go back to the land of Israel. So he decided to turn us into slaves. And I think the history again repeats itself many times. And as long as we will continue to believe in what we believe, people around us will hate us, and it won't stop us. I really believe that we should continue to live in the way that we believe. And like Rabbi Katzman said, sometimes even it will appreciate us much more if we will go with our beliefs. If a Jew starts to break down or start, circling around, then they recognize the weakness, and then they see the opportunity to fight against us, and unfortunately to try and get rid of us. So I think we should continue what Pharaoh discovered, that we are one nation, one united nation, and our mission is to go back to the land of Israel. And even though now in America, if all the Jews will leave, probably the economy in America will collapse. But yeah, this is our mission. The Ramban says that Mitzvah says to move to live in the land of Israel. We all know that many mitzvahs out of the 613 mitzvahs we can do only if we will live in the land of Israel. And it's right to say that also in Israel now life isn't perfect, and yet we see a lot of terror attacks against Jews in Israel because they're Jews, even though it's our land and we have a government and we have an army and everything. But yet the goal, the mission is to go back to the land of Israel to finish what Pharaoh knew that we need to finish, and he tried to stop us. So we yet today can still tell Pharaoh, no, you didn't win. We're still on our way to Israel. We still will get to the land of Israel, and we will win. Mark, I'll ask you a question. If there are any questions or people want to add anything?
Andrew Goldberg or Greenberg, you must be sitting there thinking. You always are thinking.
All right. So here's my question, as long as nobody else is going to start opening. So I take a look at the events in Egypt, as we talked about in the Torah. I talk about all the times that people came after the Jews, and I find even to today's time, and I find one thing in common, which leads to a basic question. Why in the time of the Torah, as the Jews were being enslaved, why didn't they fight back? in my opinion, if we take a look at Jewish history, every time there's hatred, anti-Semitism, people attack us, where is our fighting back, with the exception of Israel today, which is extremely important? But where is our fighting back? Where is it that we rise up and we defend ourselves and we put this down and we basically say we're not going to take this? It didn't happen at the time of Egypt because we let it happen. And that's always perplexed me. Now, I know part of the answer is it was predestined. It was written in the Torah years earlier that, yes, we're going to be enslaved, et cetera, et cetera. But that still doesn't stop us from rising up and saying, we're going to resist, comma. If we take a look at some of the other oppressed people in the United States, they don't put up with a lot of stuff. They fight back, they demonstrate, they rise up. They make their will known that they're not going to be putting up with this stuff, but we don't. That's my question.
Rabbi Katzman, B'shutcha, can I answer?
Oh, go ahead, sure.
I don't know if I have an answer, but I really think it's a fascinating and a very important question. And I think it takes us back to the story of Hanukkah. Okay, so in Hanukkah, we all know that we have two miracles that we celebrate. One was the miracle of winning the war, okay, or fighting against the Greeks. And the second is the small can of oil that we found. And it's fascinating to see that all the many years that we were in exile, the rabbis tried to point out mainly the miracle of the oil. The Gemara in Masechet Shabbat mentions only the miracle of the oil, and we meet the miracle of fighting against, standing for what we believe when we daven and we say in the prayers Ala Nisim. Then we really thank Hashem for the miracles of fighting against the Greeks. And the question that you asked, many rabbis asked in the past, how come during the time of exile, the rabbis decided to point out only the miracle of the oil? And a few answers that I found say that the rabbis were really afraid that Jewish people will get inspiration from the fight against the Greeks, and they will fight against the nations that they live in their land. And I think the idea that the rabbis tried to teach us is that outside of the land of Israel, it's not our home, and we don't have the ability to fight against, because then what? We will stay in the same land. We'll invade a different country, and we'll settle a new state. We didn't really have anything to do until we went back to the land of Israel. So now, and it's fascinating, now in the past more than 100 years, many rabbis writing about the miracle that happened in Hanukkah, but referring to the fighting against the Greeks, like we say in the davening, the weak against the brave, even though brave were the small amount of people that attacked the great army. I think they were much braver. But in our land, when you're in the land of Israel, you need to stand and defend yourself because you have your land, you have something to protect you. When you're outside of the land of Israel, you don't really have much to do. So today, when people stand up in America, they stand up because they have the back or the support of the land of Israel, that really they know that no matter what, they will be able always to go and live there, something that we never had until 73 years ago. So again, I don't know if it's an answer, but I'm just adding to what you shared.
Before I reply, I think you gave an opportunity for Rabbi Katzman to chime in.
Well, I guess I can just just say one thing, which is coming back to at least the 3 times, many more, opinions that there are on how you approach a situation. And some of it is as Rabbi Yoni just mentioned, depending on the condition, depending if we're in Israel, depending what type of support we have. Are we in America? Are we in Russia? Those things will also dictate a lot of it. But I'm not sure that we were always correct. And maybe taking your approach, as Andy points out, could have and should have been done. And perhaps we would have had less casualties. But as much as we didn't fight, if you look through the history, we did fight quite a bit. I mean, the story of Hanukkah is an incredible story of bravery. But even that, if you notice, the Gemara tells us about the celebration of Hanukkah, it took a long time until they actually decided to turn it into a holiday, because they were actually afraid. They were afraid to make waves about a miracle like that, because they were still, as the Gemara points out, we were still slaves to Achashverosh, and we didn't know where the wind was going to blow. So keeping a low profile has always been part of our culture in so many different situations. I mean, even like today, when we're, thank God Israel has been very successful, but it's not necessarily to our benefit when we go in and advertise a lot of our successes. I don't know. You see, there are both ways of looking at it. So I think if we keep constantly all of the three options in front of us, and realize that none of us should be canceled out, we shouldn't throw away our power, we shouldn't reduce. You know what I'm saying? We should really keep everything fresh and cleaned and prepared and ready to go, and just work with the situation as it presents itself. But the main thing still is, as we said before, it can only happen through unity. If we do it all together, we'll be successful. And if we just keep bickering and fighting with one another, which is the story of the second, the destruction of the temple, the Gemara also tells us how they were, they had Jerusalem protected, and the inner discord led to the ultimate starvation of so many and the destruction.
So before I reply, if anybody else wants to chime in, because I don't want to dominate today's class. Okay, go ahead, Jeff. Jeff, go ahead.
I was going to observe that it's in our best interest to live in and promote the well-being of our community and our country, because when there's inequality and there's economic distress, that's when we, I think, are most vulnerable to being the scapegoat or being blamed. So it seems to me it's incumbent upon us to keep our communities healthy, and I think that's good for respect for us and our quality of life.
So
Actually, Andy, I just wanted to jump in, just responding to your comment before. They tell the story about this Yankel who's sitting on a park bench, and this big burly guy walks over to him and gives him a punch. And he says, "Jew, this is a gift. This is a punch from Hezbollah." Then he comes back and gives him a kick. He says, "This is a kick from Iran." And then he gives him another shove. "This is a shove from Syria." But he realizes he's no match for me. So Yankel picks himself up and he walks away. And this guy feels very accomplished. And he takes out his book and he sits down and he reads sitting on the bench where Yankel was, just left. And a few minutes later, Yankel comes back with a big wrench, knocks him over the head. He says, "Here's a wrench from Home Depot."
Love it. So I agree that we should not boast and we shouldn't brag. I absolutely agree with that. With that being said, let's take a look at African American Heritage Month, okay? And let's take a look at Asian Heritage Month. And let's take a look at all the other nationalities who are part of the United States. They have a Heritage Month where internally, not necessarily externally, internally, they celebrate their heritage. They celebrate their contributions to the country. They celebrate their past and they focus on what needs to be done in the future. A question: when is Jewish Heritage Month? And when do we do what the other nationalities and ethnicities and cultures in the United States do? And the answer, it's a rhetorical question, is we don't. And yet those heritage months unify them, even with their differences in economics, in demographics, in geography. It's a unification. We don't do that.
Totally different
Unmuted.
thing. What?
Unmuted. I think we do it every month, except which month? Do you have any holidays before Elul?
Jeff, when you say we do that every month, are you being inclusive of the entire Jewish community, or a separate section of the community that observes rituals and spirituality, which regrettably is on the decrease every time it's measured?
Well, you know, the big ones, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Sukkot, Purim, Hanukkah. I mean, maybe, you know, I think for most Jews, at least we have those, but it's not just 1 month.
Yeah, you agreement, but those do nothing to say what contributions we have provided to the countries that we live in. I know I made that exclusive to the United States, but we need to expand that to the other countries where we certainly have had an economic and professional impact. I agree with you on the holidays, no question about it. Yet the Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, if we're going to be blunt, how many people that come to the congregation these days, especially the younger ones, actually know what they're doing there and why they're there in the first place? Our age group, yeah, we're there, we grew up with it, we understand it, we do the davening. Many of us know the Hebrew, many don't, but at least we know what's going on.
Well, you've addressed a question that all the clergy of all the movements are.
No, I got that. No, but I'm still going back to the Jewish Heritage Month, where where we ourselves honor ourselves as to the accomplishments that we do, which is a unification. That's my only point.
Andy, from my perspective, and as you know, you and I grew up about 5 miles away from each other, and as small a percentage as we are in the United States, I've never lived in another country, so I don't know about how Jews are dealt with in the rest of the world other than reading about it. I think the vast perception of the United States is that we represent a much larger percentage population-wise of the population than we really are. And if you look at Nobel Prize winners, 4 of whom graduated from my high school, all of whom were Jewish, just saying. Jonas Salk being one of them. I think the perception in this country is we really are more pervasive, which may be positive and another way very negative in terms of we run the media, we run Hollywood, we run the banks, we run this, we run that. So going back to the original topic of this week, anti-Semitism, anti-Israel, anti-Jewish, which however you want to couch it, it's the perception of this country. I mean, this young man in Utah, who is the head of this computer company, who lost his job because of his wacko perceptions of the control that we have over the world, which we do not. So in terms of a month, we can hide who we are. You know, unless you're walking around and you're wearing a shtreimel and you're wearing a yarmulke and whatever. I mean, Jewish women can hide themselves much more easily in this country. Jewish men cannot. And in terms of being ostracized or picked upon or whatever, I don't know that we need a month. If you're Asian, there was a lot of issues regarding this pandemic and the virus. And if you're African American, you can't hide who you are. You could be Jewish and be African American. You could be Christian. You could be Muslim. You could be whatever. So that's a whole different thing regarding history. I think for us, I don't know that we need a month. I don't know. I think we need to prove to people that we are who we are and to share the values that we have, which should be universal.
Yeah, I'm just going to jump in for a second. Thank you for all your comments. So number one, America celebrates Mother's Day once a year, and we celebrate it every day of the year. So just giving us 1 month is not going to be enough for the Jewish community. I think the idea of hiding our Judaism is definitely the most un-Jewish thing, even though many of us are inclined to do that. We shouldn't have to do it. And we're basically skirting our responsibilities because we're here to do a job. The terrorists who are out there to terrorize us and make us want to hide ourselves, and unfortunately have been successful over the generations, to some degree, should not be given that opportunity to succeed. I think it was Schwarzkopf who said, he was asked in an interview, General Schwarzkopf, as to whether it's appropriate or could he see forgiving the terrorists. So he says, no, forgiving the terrorist, that's God's job. He says, all we have to do is arrange for the meeting. So the understanding that their job is their job, but we don't have to react. We don't have to live our lives by the terror or by the influence or by the fear or any other any other pressure that comes from the outside, because we know what we're doing. We were given the Torah by Hashem. So the very first Rashi, which we actually discussed last time in the last class, we discussed the first Rashi, which talks about the nations of the world coming and saying that the Jews stole their land. So obviously it has the literal application of the land of Israel, but it even has a deeper application. The meaning is that the way they see it, that there's been a division. Jacob gets the spiritual, Esau gets the physical, the material, the guns, and the riches, and the Jews, have have a neshama, they have a soul, they have a Torah, but they shouldn't be dominating, they shouldn't be involved, they shouldn't be successful in the physical, everyday business of the world. So to that, we come back and say to them, no, that on the one hand, that we should be so disproportionately advanced in Nobel Prizes and stuff like that, and the rest of the world, that's another argument. But the fact that our responsibility is to be involved in everything that goes on in the world in a positive way and elevating it, that's something that's our responsibility. So it's going to obviously involve some pushback, but it doesn't mean that we have to stop. So when God says, for example, that I will bless those who bless you, doesn't mean to say that after they bless, they'll be blessed, but those that are going to bless you, they are going to be blessed. Because the Jewish people are like, somebody once described it, like the canary birds. The canary birds that are sent down into the coal mines to detect whether there is gases or fumes that are dangerous. And if they don't come back, we know that we can't go down. No country that was tough or mistreated the Jews were successful. They all went down. The Jews were the canaries. The Jews obviously said, but it didn't take too long for them to kill their own people, as is happening today in so many of those countries who expelled the Jews. And once there's no Jews left, they start killing their own people. And it's chaos. So a country like America, who's based on kindness, their inclusion of the Jewish people is not because they want to be kind to us, because they realize this is for their benefit. And if we are true to our commitment to this wonderful country and we continue living as Jews, not hiding, but living as Jews, and in a respectful way, and realizing that our responsibility to be moral is a greater responsibility than just ordinary people. Let's face it. Some of us don't like that, to hear that we're chosen, that we're special, but that's what it is. That's the reality. We shouldn't hold our nose up and look down at other people. We should, on the contrary, be kind and be benevolent and try to help in every possible way. But we have to maintain our Judaism. And the Jewish pride that Andy is talking about is something that has to be 360 days a year. Anyway, that's my little rant.
Well, I'm sitting here wondering if there's something, and I'm thinking back about what Andy had to say, if there's something that is fundamentally different about a struggle for assimilation and at the same time uniqueness that that Jews face that might be different than what other ethnicities face. I don't know if it is or not, if it's part of the history or whatever it is, but I'm sitting here wondering if there is a difference there. And it looks like I'll wonder for some time.
We can't hide the fact that we are who we are. And if we're going to try to pretend as if we're just like the Catholics, just using a different sitter, nobody's going to believe us, because that's not the truth. And that's okay. And the world, I think, is okay to accept it. But we have to be honest. We have to be transparent. We have to be, we have to set the example and try to do whatever we can to influence morality, goodness, and kindness into the world around us, not just as far as we're concerned, but everybody. And if there's going to be, if the environment is healthy, we'll all be fine. And if we allow the toxic energies to take over and bring in negative influences, whether it's through Hollywood or through other areas, and we just turn away, it's not my business, it's not in my backyard. No, I think everything has to be our concern.
You just hit a sore point with me when you mentioned Hollywood. It is amazing how many TV shows and movies that are produced, written, or directed, or starring Jews that destroy our reputation amongst the people who are not Jewish that go to these movies. That you talk about a sore point. That's one of mine. Oh my gosh. The way they depict us is, to me, fueling part of the anti-Semitism, which makes us a little bit more of a joke than to take somebody seriously. And I'm not going to mention the shows. All I know is I do my own thing and I'll watch them. But we do it to ourselves, and we do use the media that we produce, direct, write, or star in, because if people have never studied Judaism and that's the only exposure they have, then what are they going to believe? The only thing that they see.
Absolutely. Andy couldn't have said it better. We are our own best enemies or worst enemies. And you're right, because some of the stuff that you're talking about, even though I'm not a moviegoer, but I read about it and hear about it, it seems like a lot of this stuff, because it's written by a Jewish individual, then he can be criticized. And maybe if those negative influences would come from a non-Jew, he might have been criticized, and not that it would make a big difference. But what you're saying is absolutely true. And hopefully that'll also change very soon.
I think that we are basically will be the only ones that can defeat ourselves. And again, it goes back to what we mentioned many times in the past. It's all about being united. It's all about understanding that we are all on the same boat. And if someone drills a hole in his cell in his boat, it's not about his own room. It's about the entire boat, and we all need to understand that and understand it. If there's a beautiful saying in Hebrew, it probably won't be translated good in English, but we say, "Im lo niyeh tluim echad bashani, niyeh tluim echad liyad hashani." If we won't rely on our nation, on our friends, on our family, we'll end up hanging one next to another.
And if I remember my history correct, and rabbis correct me if I'm wrong, the whole story of Hanukkah began when the Jewish people were separated and kicked out the priests from the temple. So it would appear that same dissension is repetitive in our history, which led to the miracle of Hanukkah, but it all started and precipitated with our own infighting.
Also, the exile that we are now in started because Sinat Chinam, started because we fought between each other, and the rabbis teach us that no nation in the world is really able to defeat us if we are united. But if we're starting to fight between ourselves, and we all know that was the beginning of the destruction of Jerusalem, that there was a big fight between the Jews, and the Jews fought between each other until someone just opened the gates and let the other nations in. And that's why we outside of Israel today.
Are there any other questions or comments before we end up closing for the night?
Rabbi Katzman started saying.
Oh, Rabbi Katzman?
Okay, I'd just like to close by saying that, if you read the Pew studies, if you read other materials, it might look a little gloomy as far as the future of the Jewish people, but I'm completely confident, and I can say it with the greatest degree of security, that we probably have never been in a better place than we are now as a Jewish community in terms of really understanding each other and not only being tolerant, but appreciating one another. We just got to put a little bit of more spice into it, and God willing, we'll be just fine. And we should just continue studying the Torah. That's actually, that's where all the instruction, that's where all the information comes from. 30 years ago, you could have said that, well, I don't understand it. Today, there's so many options of learning and understanding, so many different versions, so many different styles. There's definitely one out there that fits your mode. So just go out there, get it online, get it in person. And together, we will not only survive, but we'll thrive. And only good things ahead of us. L'chaim.
So thank you, rabbis, for the discussion tonight, and thank for all the participants. And I'd just also like to mention, I apologize for any inconvenience you spent in the waiting room, smoking cigarettes or whatever you were doing. We had a heck of a time getting the connection right from this end. So that's what happened. And hopefully we'll figure out why that happened and not have it happen again. So thank you all.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. You're awesome, Mark.
It was all good. It was all good.
I
Thank you.
just want to conclude that the Omaha is a perfect example of a unified Jewish community that is just magnificent, where you don't, at least the 24 years I lived there, where you didn't see much of any anti-Semitism, or as much as you do at other places.